And it'll probably show actually this first, Anne Marie, which sort of sucks, but.
It says it's live right now.
Is it? Oh.
Well, it'll take a while.
Yeah, I'm not seeing. Oh,
Okay, so welcome if you're joining us. This is our next stop on our tram tour. I'm just going to wait a little bit to get confirmation that we are actually live on Facebook. We're broadcasting to both the Tijuana Estuary site as well as the Tijuana River Action Network site.
yes, we are live on both the Tijuana Estuary Facebook page and the Tijuana River Action Network Facebook page.
Perfect. All right, so welcome to our next stop on our Tijuana River Action Month tour. My name is Lorena Warner-Lata, and I'm an environmental scientist at the Tijuana River National Estuary Research Reserve with California State Parks. And today the title that you're joining us for is the three-pronged approach to wetland protection. And we're joined tonight by Dr. Kristen Goodrich, Chris Peregrin, and Dr. Jeff Crooks, all at the Research Reserve, so my colleagues. And before I introduce them, I just want to give you an overview of our tour stops. So 2 weeks ago, we started our tour. Normally, this is a live tour that we do for Tijuana River Action Month. And so we've made it virtual, and we started with a kind of look into the past of Tijuana River Action Month, the last 10 years of Tijuana River Action Month. And so that is the blue star on the screen. And we went then with Stephen Wright with Four Walls International to our border gateway to nature at the entrance to Borderfield State Park. And we learned a little bit about repurposing trash and went into Los Laureles Canyon, which we'll do a little bit of that today as well. And today we are at the green star, which represents Spooner's Mesa, which is part of county lands, the Tijuana River Regional Valley Park. And then next week, if you join next week, should be very exciting. We will be joined by our education coordinator, Anne Marie Tipton, and going to Monument Mesa to talk about the rich history of Borderfield State Park. So you won't want to miss that. It'll be at 7 o'clock again. So these are our stops on our tour today. And again, we will be talking about the three-pronged approach to wetland protection. And before I jump into this slide, I'm going to go back to the other one. Let me introduce our panelists for tonight. So we will be hearing first from Dr. Kristen Goodrich. And Dr. Kristen Goodrich is our Coastal Training Program Coordinator, and we call that CTP for short. So as the CTP coordinator at the Tijuana River National Estuary Research Reserve, Kristen works to improve coastal decision-making at local and regional levels by equipping coastal decision makers with science-based information and tools they need to address coastal resource management issues in the Southern California and Baja California regions. Priority training and technical assistance areas include climate change adaptation, wetland restoration, and collaborative science. Kristen earned a master's degree in marine affairs and policy at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, and is actually, it says here, currently pursuing, she's actually finished her PhD, woohoo, at University of California, Irvine in the School of Social Ecology. Her research focuses on the human dimension of environmental decision-making and management that occurs at the urban-nature interface. She studied how nature-based solutions, particularly those that promote ecosystem services, can improve both environmental conditions and quality of life, particularly in the San Diego-Tijuana binational context. So welcome, Kristen Goodrich.
Thanks, Lorena. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. All right, and then afterwards we will hear from Chris Peregrin, and Chris Peregrin is the reserve manager for, we'll just call it Tijuana Estuary for short, but there is that much longer name. And Chris Peregrin has worked as an environmental scientist with California State Parks since 2000. He currently serves as the manager for the research reserve and has focused on water quality, habitat restoration, species conservation, and public access in the Tijuana River Valley since 2007. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Conservation Biology from the University of California at Davis and spent the early part of his career assessing fish communities in the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta, and Sierra Nevada waterways. Chris grew up in Marin County, California, and he enjoys camping, surfing, swimming, scientific illustration, and exploring Baja California. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Lorena. Thanks for everyone joining us tonight. Looking forward to our conversation.
Okay. And then our final panelist for tonight is Dr. Jeff Crooks. He is our research coordinator at the reserve. And Dr. Crooks has been working on the coastal wetlands of San Diego for over 30 years and has been at the research reserve since 2002. Jeff runs the research reserve's research and monitoring program, which focuses on using sound science to adaptively manage urban marine ecosystems such as salt marshes and lagoons. The reserve is currently focusing on using restoration to increase resilience of coastal wetlands in the face of climate change, as well as the ecology and management of invasive species. Jeff received a BS in zoology from Colorado State University and a master's in marine ecology from San Diego State University, and a PhD in oceanography from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. He was also a postdoc fellow at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. So welcome, Jeff.
Hello there. Thank you. I look forward to this.
Awesome. So as I mentioned, tonight you're here to learn about how we protect the wetland that is the Tijuana Estuary. It is the largest coastal wetland in Southern California, but that wasn't always the case. And I'm sure many of you know or can imagine that we face many management issues. And I know usually first thing that comes to mind is the various solid waste and pollutants that come down the Tijuana River. So we will be addressing today the pollutants and how we address those pollutants using this three-pronged approach. So each one of our panelists is going to get into this more detailed, but just to give you a quick overview of those three prongs. So one is to address pollutants at the source. So we partner with Mexico for source control. Two, to stop pollutants at the border. So with the sediment basins and trash capture facilities. And then finally, restore healthy ecosystem function. So, and we do that through our Tijuana Estuary Tidal Restoration Program, or we'll be calling it TETRIP for short. And in order to illustrate all of these points, so on this, our tour map again, the places that you would normally be able to see from Spooner's Mesa are Los Laureles Canyon. So that is upstream in one of the sub-watersheds, feeds into Goat Canyon sediment basins, number 2. And then over east to the Nelson Sloan Quarry site. And then finally over to the Model Marsh and larger Tetrip area. And just to kind of give you a better sense of place and also to maybe illustrate who's talking to you. So I'm here on the northern part of the reserve giving an introduction. So that's me. But today we would be standing, if this tour was in person, we would be standing at Spooner's Mesa. And it's this great overview of the whole Tijuana Estuary and the Research Reserve. And you can see out to Cabrillo on a nice clear day. You can see out to Cabrillo National Monument. You can see the IB Pier in here, the helicopter base, the Navy helicopter base. And you can also see into downtown San Diego and the Coronado Bay Bridge right there. So that's this great vantage point in the river valley. And getting back to our topic then, so wetland protection. If you were to look back in history, and we had a study done a few years ago called the Tijuana River Valley Historical Ecology Investigation out of San Francisco, and Jeff will talk more about that as well. But this map is maybe a little bit complicated, but if you focus in on the green areas of this map, that is the historic salt marsh, which is a type of wetland vegetation. And so you can see, especially kind of midway here would be about where the Tijuana River empties out into the Pacific Ocean. And all the green area then, especially south of the river, has been heavily lost over the last, this was in 1850. So over the last 100 years, that area has been lost. In the northern end, kind of a conversion of habitats has been happening, excuse me. And so a lot of this is due to sedimentation and sediment as a pollutant. So wanted to kind of give you that glimpse and to make it a little bit more real so you can see what we are talking about. This is sediment or dirt that essentially washed in from upstream. And this was in 2004, 2005, a wet season. And so this was our entrance kiosk, and you can see it is buried in a few feet of mud that has come in. So sediment is a problem because it can cover wetlands up. And if you look at these two maps, so May 2003, if you look at where the arrow is pointing, you can see this area and then compare it down below to January of 2005. All this kind of dirt, or maybe looks like sand to you, would be pretty much all the sediment that has washed in and covered up the wetland that was in that area. So this can be pretty dramatic. And in California, we've lost over 90% of our wetlands. So we are really in the business of protecting those wetlands, and not only protecting them, but also trying to bring back wetlands. And that leading into, so now we'll get into our three-pronged approach. So first we'll start upstream with Kristen Goodrich, our CTP coordinator. So Kristen, take it away.
Thanks so much, Lorena. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I wish we could all be together at the top of Spooner's Mesa today, but look forward to the opportunity when that's a possibility for us again. As Lorena has pointed out, we're in a really complex setting, and that setting of the Tijuana Estuary is one that is binational. So when we think about addressing our management challenges at the Tijuana Estuary, our entire lens really is one that is binational. Next slide, Lorena. Thanks. So here's just a snapshot of the Tijuana River watershed. 3/4 of our watershed is in Mexico. And so when we think about addressing environmental issues at the Tijuana Estuary, we think about partnering across the border with community and with decision makers, and thinking about solutions that help protect not only the environment, but also people who live in this watershed. Next slide. So on the US side of the border, as Lorena has pointed out, we have some significant management challenges, including flooding, solid waste that ultimately becomes marine debris, sedimentation, and then also issues around water quality and sewage. And so you can see here a picture of the sedimentation basins with trash booms that are in place to collect trash and intercept trash as it moves through the system when it rains. And you'll hear about that when we talk about our other prong. But what I think is really important to think about, and what we try to think about in our work, is that impacts that we see on the US side are often portrayed in maps as just stopping at the border. As you can see in this picture here with beach closures. Of course, that's not the case. The border, things don't stop just at the border. So when we are trying to develop our management strategies, we want to think about both sides of the border and communities on both sides. Next slide. In Mexico, things look very different, especially in Los Laureles Canyon, where we focus a lot of our work and our interventions. So you can see here very unstable hillsides, tire retaining walls that when not built correctly can crumble. We see a lot of waste, and in the worst case, during some rain events, we see mudslides, and as a result, loss of property and loss of homes. And so we really want to, in our work, in our first prong, address the issue at the source. And so we do that a number of ways, mostly through partnerships. Next slide. So I first want to say, before diving into just a sample of the type of work that we do to address the issues at the source in Mexico, is that this work couldn't be done without one of our amazing employees at the reserve, Ana Eguiarte, who is our binational liaison and supports and facilitates a lot of our work that's cross-border. So one example of what we've been doing over the last couple years, more than that now, is working with community to co-develop our understanding of flood risk and the impacts of flooding, both in Tijuana, but in the US. And this is an image of a research team that we pulled together, mostly embedded in community, to help us get a better picture and sense of the lived experiences of flooding in Los Laureles Canyon. Next slide. As a result, we got some really interesting results and engineering models that grew out of that effort, and it's helped us deliver training and technical assistance to coastal decision makers, like, for example, in this case, through the Protección Civil, which is an agency in Tijuana that works on emergency preparedness and response, to try to really unpack this relationship between solid waste, marine debris, and flooding, and ways in which we can improve that situation so that we see less flooding and less risk to community in Tijuana, and less marine debris and solid waste downstream in the Tijuana estuary. Next slide. We're also working in community in Los Laureles Canyon. This is an image of work that we've been doing in collaboration with the University of California, San Diego, and thinking about how we can better embed ourselves in community so we understand the issues at the source, and working with groups to think about innovative solutions to water and water quality. And so in this case, we're developing innovative approaches around gray water treatment and thinking about really engaging community in that process. Next slide. And throughout all of the work that we do, we try to build connections to community, connections with community, so we can understand these issues and bring back new knowledge that is community-based and community-informed as we think about solutions in the US. This was an image from a group that we worked with to think about innovative solutions to plastic reuse, and are making lots of headway in that space too. And this is also a couple images that we're really proud of and excited about, and an image that allows you to see our binational liaison, Ana Eguiarte, who has been for many years now organizing a King Tides, called Baja King Tides project, that is really kind of enabling and motivating community and youth to be going out and taking pictures of some of the highest tides of the year. Some of you may be familiar with this effort in the United States, but bringing this into cities, including the city of Ensenada, to be really trying to depict what sea level rise might look like and how we can respond with more green infrastructure approaches to be more resilient to impacts of climate change. Next slide. And then finally, we're so excited about the work that has been happening in this space to really be leaders in reducing plastic pollution, again, at the source, working with the city of Tijuana and the city of Tecate in developing a plastic bag ban, informing decision makers around the impacts of plastic pollution and how we can address it. If we do that within the city of Tijuana, we eventually see less plastic and plastic bags and waste in the Tijuana estuary. So this has been a really extraordinary effort that was led by Ana Eguiarte, again, amazing colleague of ours, to very innovatively work with decision makers to make this a reality. And so really kind of a model for even cities in the United States to be following. Next slide. And so I'll pass it on to Chris to talk about our second prong. And thanks again for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our work in Mexico and cross-border and thinking about the social ecological. Look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you. And actually, that's a great point, Kristen. So if anyone has any questions that come along during the course of this talk, please feel free to write those up on the Facebook chat, because there is a little bit of a lag. And so at the end, when we call for questions, it'll just make it more smooth if you've already typed up your questions. And that way also you don't forget a question that you might have had. So Chris, take it away. You're on mute, Chris. Hold on just a moment. Waiting for Chris. Oh, there he is.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And apologize for the connection. I was connected through the Zoom platform, and I was recently had an internet issue and was kicked off. So I'm connecting through the phone here, and I have the presentation in front of me on my laptop. So I'll just kind of talk through these slides. The first slide I wanted us all to look at and consider here is this is an image. On the left, you'll see an image of the canyon, Los Laureles Canyon. This is upstream of Borderfield State Park, and drains directly downstream into Goat Canyon. And you can see that this is an image that was taken probably 2005 or maybe a bit before that. And you can see that there's some fairly irregular development happening in this canyon, which is a situation that you'll find in various sub-watersheds and pockets within the city of Tijuana. And I think that this is one of the reasons why it's so important that we focus on that first prong, where we're partnering with our neighbors in Mexico and working to resolve some of the development issues upstream. So we don't have living conditions like this on the border, and we don't have the associated public health and environmental impacts that follow from having irregular development such as this. One of the things that really that is really important to us and is a result of irregular development like this upstream is sedimentation. And you can see on the right side of this image, there are two images. You can see from the first one above is from May 2003, and this is an aerial image of the Tijuana Estuary and in the 2003 era. And then if you look right below it, you see an image from January 2005. And notice the large area of beige or cream color that you see right in the middle of that lower image. That's a large area of sedimentation that resulted from a very large storm that occurred in 2005. So just a dramatic example of what can happen when you have unconsolidated slopes upstream and irregular development, and then a large rainstorm. You can have massive amounts of sediment coming down in one storm event, and extreme negative impacts to our coastal wetlands. In this example here in 2005, it's estimated that we lost about 15 acres of salt marsh in one storm event. So something that's really important to address. And although we're moving forward with that first prong of partnering with Mexico, we also need to look at what can we do right now in order to stop sedimentation like this, stop some of these cross-border flows in a way that is a bit more immediate while we embark on that lifelong journey of partnering with our neighbors in Mexico and resolving all of the issues along the border. And the next, Lorena, if you could advance to the next slide, please. We'll take a look at one of our solutions here. This is the Goat Canyon sediment basins. So what you see in this image is, it looks like a series of two ponds in the middle of Borderfield State Park. And what we have here is a series of retention basins. And the Goat Canyon sediment basins were constructed in 2005, and they're intended to capture sediment that's coming in across the border and protect the salt marsh. And you can see that in this image, this is directly after they were cleaned out. And so you can think of these as tanks or as ponds that as you get storm flows that come through with a lot of sediment, they fill up with sediment and they stop that sediment from reaching the estuary. And as subsequent storms keep coming through and keep coming through, ultimately these ponds or these sediment basins fill up with sediment. And then at the end of the year, we clean them out. And so that's one of our interventions to protect the estuary. If you could advance to the next slide, please, Lorena. So this next slide is a plan view of the sediment basins. So just to kind of give you a different image of what they look like, because this is the engineering, in a sense, an engineering drawing or schematic of the sediment basins. And you can see that there are two basins in series, and the flow would be coming from the lower right-hand corner, which would be upstream, and then flowing downstream and out into the estuary. I think it's important to note that not only do we have a series of basins to capture sediment, but we also have on the side a processing pad that we use to, after we dig the sediment out of the basins, we use that to place the material and manage it. Next slide, please. So this image here is a picture of our trash booms. And it's important to note that the sediment basins, like with these cross-border flows, we're not just seeing sediment come down across the in the watershed. We're also seeing large amounts of solid waste and trash. So in 2011, we started developing various types of trash collection infrastructure in the sediment basins in order to capture this trash before it enters the Tijuana estuary and then goes out into the ocean. Next slide, please. So how do we clean these out? This is an image of a large piece of heavy equipment that we're using. This is typical piece of heavy equipment that we use to clean up the sediment basins. So this is a very large facility. It's roughly 10 acres in size. It captures 60,000 cubic yards of sediment, which is equivalent to a football field, 3 feet deep in sediment. So we're talking about large volumes of material, and we need heavy equipment to move it. And these are scrapers. Okay, next slide, please. So after we dig all the sediment out of the sediment basins, we bring it to a processing pad on the side. And this is an image here of a mobile sediment processor or a mobile screen plant. And this is a typical piece of machinery that we'll bring in for a period after we've cleaned up the sediment basins. And we use this equipment to separate the sediment from the trash and the rock. And then we can bring the materials to various export locations. Next slide, please. So it's very expensive to do this. And that's one of the reasons why focusing on the first prong is really important, because we know that it's less expensive to deal with these issues upstream and more sustainable in the long term. But we know that in order to protect the salt marsh, we need to implement solutions like the Goat Canyon sediment basin. However, it's very costly. The current operating budget for the Goat Canyon sediment basins is $1.8 million a year to clean out the sediment, and currently that's getting us about 20 to 30,000 cubic yards out of the sediment basin. So we need to find cost-effective ways to manage this sediment. We have a project that's in planning right now, the Nelson Sloan Quarry Restoration Project, and this is a proposal to use an abandoned quarry that's in the Tijuana River Valley as a place to bring this sediment. So it's a quarry that was used for sediment and gravel excavation in the past and has been sitting vacant for many years. And what we are proposing to do now is take the sediment that we're capturing in the sediment basin and bring it to the quarry and restore the landform and restore the natural habitat, the coastal sage scrub habitat that used to be at this location. Next slide, please. So the Nelson Sloan Quarry is located in the Tijuana River Valley. You can see here on the left a panned out view locating us on the border. And then to the right, this is about 4 miles east, 3 to 4 miles east of the Pacific Ocean in the landform located within the county, the Tijuana River Valley Regional Park, the county's land. Next slide, please. This is a bit of a more close-up view of the project site. And if you look very closely, you can see the engineer drawings, the topographic lines that are set on top of the disturbed habitat of the abandoned quarry. And you can see the proposal to restore the landform with the sediments excavated from the sediment basin. This quarry is estimated to be able to receive 1 million cubic yards of sediment in order to restore the landform. And with 1 million cubic yards taken to this location, that would allow us to clean out the Goat Canyon sediment basins for 20 years. Next slide, please. It's important, and so I mentioned that it would allow us to clean out the Goat Canyon sediment basins for 20 years, and so it's important to recognize that this project is a phased approach. And what you see here are 3 images that depict these subsequent phases of bringing material in and filling up this quarry through time. So the concept is that we would start every year, we would bring in a bit of material from Goat Canyon sediment basin, or we may also be bringing in material from the pilot channel, which is managed by the city of San Diego, or from Smuggler's Gulch, which is managed by the county of San Diego. And we could also bring sediment in from the Tijuana Estuary, the salt marsh restoration project, which you're going to be hearing about shortly from Dr. Jeff Crooks. So one of the things that I'm really excited about this project is that it's expensive to manage sediment, and what we need are cost-effective ways to deal with this material. And also, we need solutions that have multiple benefits. And the Nelson Sloan Quarry Restoration Project not only allows us to manage sediment in a cost-effective way, but it also restores landform and restores coastal sage scrub and natural habitats in the Tijuana River Valley. And so that's just a quick snapshot of prong number 2, capturing sediment and solid waste before they enter the salt marsh. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Dr. Jeff Crooks, who will talk about the 3rd prong, restoring natural function in the Tijuana Estuary.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing there, but it's probably a pretty accurate depiction of the way I give talks up on that mesa there. So yeah, we've heard about sediment management up at the source, dealing with the source, and that's always a great place to start and something to do. We've heard about trapping it before it gets to the wetlands. Now let's think about the wetlands themselves. And we know that the sediment impacting the system is a part of the problem, but this is really about how the wetlands themselves can be part of the solution to the sediment issues and what can we do about that. So the picture you're looking at now, this map is from, I think, 1849 from the border survey of the river valley. Obviously it's from the historical ecology study that Lorena mentioned, and you can see extensive wetland and creek and river networks throughout the valley, and especially to the southern side of the valley there. At this time, the main river course was actually probably flowing along where Monument Road is now, and then out into the wetland and then out to the ocean. So there was a lot of water down in the southern and marsh in that southern end of the estuary. Okay, next slide. And this is a fairly recent shot of what it looks like now. Again, not a lot of water to be seen anymore. You can see the river mouth there. And just for reference, I put on the Pearl site, the Pacific Estuarine Research Lab, operated by San Diego State in the 80s and the 90s. And if you look closely there, you can see that area has a bunch of little trenches and it looks like landforms. Those were experimental plots and mesocosms, and there were areas there that we were pumping seawater out of the channel that was right next to that area into this site. There's no water to be seen there anymore at all. If you're familiar with that area, it's hard to imagine that not that long ago there was a tidal creek that was supplying water to this sort of marine lab that's high and dry now. So that's a context for thinking about the sediment in this system. Okay, next. We've started restoration there, and you've heard a little bit about this. This is the Model Marsh, a 20-acre restoration project that was implemented as part of TETRP, the Tijuana Estuary Tidal Restoration Program. The Model Marsh was made about 20 years ago, And we've had a lot of opportunity to look at it and study it and see what works and see what doesn't. I'll return to that. So what we're working on now is next is restoring the area around it, with the model marsh as the literal and figurative centerpiece of this new restoration. Literal in the sense that we're looking to restore the areas around the marsh, the model marsh, and figurative in the sense that, again, the model marsh was a model. It was an opportunity to learn lessons about how to do this sort of marsh restoration. So we can take those lessons and apply them to this new work. Okay, next slide. So what are we talking about when we're thinking about restoring habitats? Restoring the wetlands. It's really three different things we focus on. And the first is what we often think of in terms of restoration is restoring habitats, getting the areas, the different wetland types, salt marsh, tidal creek, mud flat back, and then obviously supporting the species that live there, right? So you see the shot of the clapper rail, Ridgway's rail there. And that's clearly a focus of this, is we want to get back buried salt marsh. We want to dig it out and have it see the light of day again. Obviously, we'd replant. The other shot of the wetland is the model marsh, sort of a few years into it with the planted cordgrass starting to grow. So that's part of what we're focusing on here is habitat. Just dig and get back and restore the habitats that used to be there. But there's really more than that too. So next slide. And so part of what we're trying to do then is also restore function. So it's not just the way things were, it's the way things worked. And that's why we look at this historical ecology study and the old maps. And, it gives us some sense of what was where, and maybe we could put this there, in this specific spot. But that's not really the intent of historical ecology studies. We're not necessarily trying to recreate the map of what this place looked like in 1849 or 1852 or 1926 or any of those. We were trying to understand what habitats were there and how those habitats worked, right? And we're sort of trying to restore ecosystem function. And in this sense, a primary function of wetlands is a place where sediment gets into. Some sediment stays behind, helps build and grow the wetlands. Sediment has been coming into wetlands since the last ice age. That's why we have these wetlands, because sediment has been coming into them. But a wetland that's working effectively exports a lot of that sediment. It moves through that moves through the wetland and onto the beach and into the near shore zone and helps nourish the beaches and dunes. So that's really what we're trying to do. We've got to get that water back, and that water moving, the water coming and going with the tides, and able to export that sediment out to the beach. So instead of dump trucks and bulldozers moving the water around, what we're trying to get is tides and currents to move water around. And the way you do that is the way you restore habitats, right? You lower elevations, you create salt marsh, and you really focus on tidal channels and water movement. The more the water moves, the faster it moves, the more sediment that can be moved. So the sediment that gets into the system can get out of the system, out onto the beach and into the near shore zone where it belongs. So we're really trying to focus on restoring these functions. Here's a shot of Justin McCullough with some work we're doing, trying to understand tidal exchange with his magic boogie board in the tidal channel there near the model marsh. Again, we want to move this water and sediment out onto the beach. That happens through the river mouth, the tidal inlet. And that's a really key function and a really key goal we're trying to get at. The amount of water coming in and out of the system really regulates how much the mouth scours and stays open or how much it closes. When you lose wetland and in intertidal area to sediment, less water moving around, less scour at the mouth, and the more likely it is to close. It happened during a couple of El Niños, in 84 here shown, but obviously more recently in 2016 El Nino, we had a mouth closure event with a lot of problems. And one way to deal with those mouth closure events is to restore the system and to get water moving around and get the sediment moving through the system. And again, out onto the beach and dunes. And I'm just showed a shot here of some recent work we're doing, trying to understand the processes of dune restoration and dune building with this experiment being led by the coastal restoration consultants. So again, we're trying to restore habitat, but we're also trying to restore function. Have the system be able to get sediment into it and then get it back out again. And then finally, the last thing we try and focus on, and I've already alluded to this, is we want to learn lessons about how to do this. It's not easy to restore salt marsh. They're really complicated systems. Really, the one habitat type that exists at the interface of the land, the sea, and the fresh water, everything is coming together there. So they're hard systems to restore. And anytime we do a project, we try and not just do adaptive management and keep track and see whether what we made, is it working right? Do we need to nudge it? We do that, of course, but we really try and be explicit and say, what uncertainties can we address in this project? And then how can we apply them in future projects? So here's the model marsh. Don't worry about the detail too much, but you can see three creek network system and all these little rectangles on there. This was a restored habitat, but it was a 20-acre experiment designed to look at building a marsh with and without creek networks. How would the marsh structure and function look in these different areas? The rectangular areas were different approaches for marsh restoration and revegetation. How close should you put the plants together? How should you amend the soil? That sort of thing. So we're taking those lessons from the model marsh 20 years ago, and we learned lessons, applying them to what we do, what we're planning now. And then we're asking new questions, specifically about elevation and what plants to put where on the slope from the marsh to the upland, especially with things related to climate change and sea level rise. So that'll be a primary focus. And I'll just plug this book that Chris Nordby, who's been working in the Valley since really the 70s, just put together about the lessons learned from many of the different restoration projects done at the Tijuana Estuary. Okay, next. So hopefully this work will get done here pretty soon. We've been working on it a long time, this next phase of marsh restoration. A lot of this is being done in the context of broader restoration efforts throughout Southern California. And there's a group called the Wetlands Recovery Project that's been focused on wetland restoration for many years. And recently we completed a regional strategy about wetlands restoration, really hundreds of wetlands in Southern California. And I'll date myself here, but we made the cover of the Rolling Stone, right? The cover picture for this regional strategy for the future of Southern California wetlands is the Tijuana Estuary. So we're really excited about our work here and the restoration we're going to do, but also the opportunity to plug into wetland restoration and help inform other efforts throughout the region. All right, thank you very much.
And so thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Chris, and thank you, Kristen, for that in-depth look at how we protect wetlands at the Tijuana River National Estuarine Research Reserve in the Tijuana River Valley. And at this point, I'm going to ask Anne-Marie Tipton and Maria Ahmad if there are any questions coming in on Facebook, and we would like to take time to answer any of the questions that you might have. So please, if you haven't already written down your question, please write down your question, and we will, I know there is a little bit of a lag, so I will wait a little bit to make sure we get your questions. And while we are waiting, just wanted to plug again, this is part of Tijuana River Action Month, and which ends, it's 5 weeks long, and it ends on October 10th. So there are still more activities that you can get involved in. We normally try to do cleanup and education events in person. This year, everything is virtual, but if you do want to get out and make a difference in your neighborhood and in your local watersheds, if you didn't participate in Coastal Cleanup Day and you missed that, there will be a cleanup, virtually hosted cleanup on October 10th, the final day of Tijuana River Action Month. So if you want to know about that event or any of the other events, go to the Tijuana River Action Network Facebook page and look under the events. Also, if you have a young one at home who likes to draw, there's also Surfrider is hosting an art contest. If you want to go to, next week we'll be at Monument Mesa, but if you want to go to Monument Mesa a little bit sooner, on Saturday morning, Dan Watman from Friends of Friendship Park will be touring the Binational Friendship Garden that's there. So that's just an idea or just a glimpse of some of the tram events that are still to come. And si hablas español and you would like to join up on some of the events that are happening in Tijuana or in Tecate, there are also events happening there. And again, all these events are on the TRAN Facebook page. So Anne Marie, Maria, any questions coming through?
I haven't seen anything. Maria?
Yeah, nothing on Tran.
All right. So at this point, if nobody has any questions, please feel free, if you think of something along the way, please feel free to reach out through Facebook, or you can look at our Tijuana Estuary website as well. There's lots of information there. If you want to come to any of these public meetings for the Tetra project or for the Nelson Sloan project, those will be coming up shortly. And so you can find out about those on our page, which is trnerr.org. And I'd like to thank all of our
There is a question.
Oh, question.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah. This is to Chris and Jeff. How do your two actions work together? For example, how does sediment transport work with marsh restoration?
Yeah, I think I can take that, and Chris, you can jump in. Well, I mean, the two projects are really both part of Tetra, in the sense that the problem is that obviously the system has been overwhelmed by sediment, and we needed to demonstrate that we could protect the marsh from the excess sediment loads that were coming through before we could start or really do a whole bunch of salt marsh restoration down there. Because obviously, well, there was a big healthy system there that got buried in too much sediment. So for the meantime, for now, it's vital that we keep on trapping the sediment. And all the sediment doesn't get trapped in the basins, right? It's not 100%. Nothing like that is 100% effective. So it's important in the near term that we think about and actually capture that sediment in the Go Canyon basins so that we can proceed with the marsh restoration. Now into the future, we don't know, especially as sea levels start to rise, some of that sediment might be more of a resource, right? And so we're paying attention to that. So in the near term, we're still in the business of sediment management, right? We need to capture that sediment, get more tidal flushing going, get the mouth scoured out more, then pay attention to things. And then as things change down there, we can think about how to control the sediment and what we might do with additional approaches to sediment management.
I found another question. This is, does this project expect any change in sediment transport to the ocean, more or less? So this could be to Chris, I guess.
Or is that me? That might be me
Either
too.
one.
You want me to take it, Chris?
Do you expect more or less sedimentation making its way to the ocean?
Well, the goal is to have more sediment make it to the ocean through the restoration, right? The name of the project is the Tijuana Estuary Tidal Restoration Program. And this was started in the early 90s, largely in response to that mouth closure that happened in the 80s. And they understood that a primary problem was, yes, loss of habitat, but a loss of the volume of water coming and going with the tides. Just a little more detail. So what we call tidal prism is the amount of water coming and go with the tides. And we've estimated that we've lost about 70% of that compared to the mid 1800s. So when the estuary fills up with seawater and then at high tide and drains at low tide, there's 70% less of that occurring now than there used to be. So the goal then, by excavating these tidal channels and lowering elevation, is to get more water moving around, and that water will help scour out the mouth, but also be able to move sediment out into the near shore zone. But I will say this is one, we have several more phases to do of this restoration. We're talking about 80 acres here or so now for this next phase. Ideally, we have about a couple hundred acres planned. So we're right now doing the calculations. Okay, how much more prism do you think this will get us? How much will it restore compared to this now? And then we can start to think about how much more sediment movement. But yes, the goal is to get more tidal action, help scour the mouth and put the sediment on the beach, and restore that process. And again, it's gonna take probably a few stabs at that. You know, I don't know that sediment movement is really complicated, and there's folks at Scripps and other places trying to help us figure this out. But this first phase is a start.
Kristen, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I would just add to that, you know, we are also taking a close look at how sedimentation might be changing at the source. So a lot of the sediment that we see coming through the system as a result of erosion that happens in the canyon communities that we spoke about earlier. And so the urbanization of Los Laureles Canyon and other urban canyons in the city of Tijuana has largely resulted in the city not being able to come in and provide certain services like water hookups, like electricity, and like pavement. And so when it does rain, that sediment comes through the system and we see it intercepted by the sedimentation basins. And as Jeff has been speaking about, impacting the tidal prism. But as the city does continue to develop, and as we see more pavement happening within those canyon communities, we actually might see less sediment. So we're in a situation right now where we have an abundance of sediment, but we also need to be thinking towards the future, especially as we consider the impacts of sea level rise, that at some point we actually might need sediment to keep up with the pace of sea level rise. So it's a careful consideration, and one we're thinking a lot about with researchers and local universities as we try to model different types of land use and sediment sources, and then the impacts of sediment downstream.
Thank you.
I see another question from Dick. It's, do you expect Tetra to eventually scour out the existing sediment load on the marsh? So maybe what's already been deposited?
Yeah, that's a good question. There might be some of that. And, you know, the model, and we can kind of look at the model marsh and what that did. It was basically a 20-acre bellows at the end of that tidal channel there. And we think it did help to sort of restore that channel that connects between the model marsh and the tidal inlet and scour it out. So yes, it is part of this. It is part of this helping nature help itself approach. The more water is moving around, right in there, the more water is moving around, the more it can do work. And the faster the water is moving around, the more work it can do. Again, it's a complicated system. It's not like a river, because it's a river where that changes directions every 6 hours, right, with the tides. So it's a complicated system. And, you know, but that's certainly the spirit, and this is long, for 30 years now, this has been the goal, right, and of trying to do this. Now, the reality is, again, in the short term, there's just too much sediment coming down. There's too much sediment there in the system. So I mean, during my career, I don't foresee a time probably where we can dust off our hands and say, the system's good. We don't need to work on the Tijuana Estuary anymore. But I do see us, again, the mantra that I try and think about is helping nature help itself, right? And we might have to help nature, but I think that nature can help itself as well. And that's what we're trying to make sure we facilitate.
Thank you. All right.
I think we have another question, but I'm trying
Oh,
to,
I'm excited about all these questions.
Maria, did you see, I see there's a like couple
Oh,
more.
yeah. So then there's another one. Kristen, does current sea level rise models show increased flooding of the river mouth?
But I do see.
Oh, Anne Marie, I can hear your. Yeah, so, Kristen, you're on mute.
Thanks. Maria, sorry, the connection was a little, would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, it says, does current sea level rise models show increased flooding of the river mouth?
Yeah, so we've been working with modelers at the University of California, Irvine on a project called Flood Rise, Flood Resilient Infrastructure and Sustainable Environments. And those flood models have shown us various scenarios based on various kind of conditions. And so sea level rise certainly plays a role in flooding and in overtopping dune systems at the Tijuana River mouth. And so that's certainly an impact. But what we've actually been taking a harder look at is the impacts of riverine flooding on the Tijuana River Valley and on the communities within Los Laureles Canyon, and the flooding that we see in those places based on, again, those kind of different scenarios affected by different drivers is pretty extensive flooding in the Tijuana River Valley and within the canyon communities. So we're thinking a lot about how we might respond to the flooding events like that, and then in conjunction with riverine flooding, how the impact of sea level rise will compound that. So a longer answer to your question, but what I will point you to is a great resource that's available through the Flood Rise website. It's a flood hazard viewer that was co-developed using input from community and end users and decision makers, both on the US side and in Mexico. And I don't have the URL readily available, but if you Google Flood Rise, so Flood RISE, Flood Hazard Viewer, it should pop up as one of your first options. And you can take a look around and plug in different kind of scenarios and see for yourself using that flood modeler and that flood hazard viewer as a tool, what the future might look like.
And we can put that URL in the chat for this Facebook.
Thanks, Lorena.
And I can also add something quick to that too, about the mouth itself, right? And again, it's one of these things that really is complex, and it's obviously central to what we're trying to understand. So we did some scenario planning around this a few years ago, and that information is available on our website. It's the curve, climate understanding and the resilience in the river valley. And it talks about different scenarios with sea level rise, but then what might happen to the mouth. And really quickly, if it's just sea level going up and it's nice quiet ocean and it's just pushing more water in and out of the estuary, that probably gets some tidal prism for free. It probably increases the tidal exchange, which, you know, in some ways would be of some benefit. It obviously would cause issues in other places, but it could be increased tidal exchange. However, if there's bigger waves associated with that, and it pushes more sediment than water, or pushes a lot of sediment with the water, that could be an issue. And we have reason to be concerned because the mouth is closed sort of seriously twice in the past, you know, since the mid 80s. Both were associated with high sea levels during the El Nino and big waves. So you have big waves on top of a higher sea level that pushes sediment deeper and farther into the system, and it's harder to get back out. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that, but we've done a lot of work to try and understand it. And in the long run, you know, a few decades out, it probably will increase the amount of tidal flow and the amount of water coming in and out of the estuary. The nearer term, we're not sure. I say that a lot, don't I? But it's a research reserve. That's what we're trying to figure all this stuff out.
All right, Maria and Anne Marie, anything more?
Not seeing anything more.
Perfect. Well, if you think of any questions after we're done, feel free to put them in the Facebook chat or reach out to us, and we will try to answer your question as best as we can. And we thank you for spending your evening with us. And I would like to thank again pretty much all of our team, a big chunk of our team at the Research Reserve. The program managers are here tonight, and Maria and Anne-Marie, and I'll lump myself in education for tonight too, since I was part of their team for a long time, here helping to make sure and facilitate this happening. So thank you all of you for being here with us, and I'm going to end our live stream. Thank you. Good night.